Hi, this is Chris Cornell of Soundgarden. Actually, Kim's still working on a B-sides record. All the stuff that we've been doing that isn't the B-sides record is somewhat miraculous, because that's the thing that we all have kind of wanted to do. And part of that is just the nature of what B-sides were to us. We were like this band that was always album-oriented and still are, even though that's going away. And B-sides were sort of extra tracks, and they were extra songs for outside the U.S. releases, particularly like Japan, because at the time bootlegging was huge anywhere, and in Asia anywhere, really. And the only way to get them to buy the actual hardware was to put something that they couldn't get from the U.S. on it. And I always felt like that was sort of a backhanded slap to our fans in the U.S. or Australia or Canada, because those were our hardcore fans that had been there from the very beginning, and yet we're giving away this other stuff to other people. And so we always had kind of a bad attitude toward it. And because of that, we've always kind of been chomping at the bit to make this B-sides record. And every time it seems like a good time to get that going, we end up doing something like this 20th anniversary of Superunknown. That's really like I guess you would refer to them as the catalog archivist people at the record company, and Kim Thiel, who is the one guy that has every cassette and every CD and every version of every mastering somewhere. I don't know how well they're cataloged, but he has them, and he goes through them and he finds them, and then describes what he has in great detail, and he just has the patience and the talent for that sort of thing. So he's the guy that has dug all this stuff up. And a lot of the demos, like multi-track demos for this record and other ones are ones that I did. And I have the tapes or the mixes somewhere, but I don't know where. And most of the time, if there's a demo that I did at home that I want to hear, I have to ask him for it, because I know he'll have it. It can, yeah. I think anytime we're together, stuff happens. I mean, we just were in South America, and I like on my iPhone, I have a voice memo of Kim playing some guitar riff that he was just playing, that I thought, oh, we got to remember that, and that's kind of how it works, you know. We'll all also be sitting sort of alone, coming up with ideas and remembering them, and I think what gets the ball rolling really is we share a couple of those. And because of the nature of it being four of us with ideas, it goes from 0 to 60 really fast. You know, you go from no ideas that you're thinking about for the next Soundgarden record to like 7. And that's a lot. Because 7, if you just pursued 7 songs, for example, as a band like us, by the time you got those done, you're going to have another 7 by accident. And that's why we have hour-and-a-half long albums. It's a world that I don't think I imagined was going to happen. I mean, I always think that there's a cycle of popularity when it comes to music, and that different genres kind of come into prominence and then go away, and then they come back. And the first time I went to a party and it was like 80s night, and they're playing, you know, all of these different bands and the Spandau Ballet, and I was shocked because I never thought I'd hear any of that music again ever, because it was so overdone and it was so awful to me. And now I see it sort of coming back, and I think about rock music in that way, and I think that'll probably change, but I don't know when. I believe that it will, though, and I don't know what form it will take, because how people listen to music, how people buy music, and how they perceive it is changing, and you've got a new generation that kind of goes one song at a time, and streaming is going to change that, where they don't buy albums and they don't listen, they don't get into sort of one mood for more than one song, maybe. But I do believe that there will always be kids like I was, that respond to it, and then they want to become these little researchers, almost like, you know, the equivalent of the rock paleontologist or geologist nerd that sits in a room and wants to know the history of it, wants to know where it came from and why, and and who created it, and that was what was exciting to me as a kid. And it wasn't that easy. It was challenging to find records, to be able to buy them, to find them, to source them out, to find people that knew about rock. It was a challenge, and it was exciting. And I think that will always exist. And I see that actually with Soundgarden. I see young, sort of wide-eyed rock fans showing up and looking at us like we're Mount Rushmore, but we still live, and they're discovering some part of the history of rock. And that's exciting. Yeah, and when you go back into the history of rock and think of how they had it so easy. 7-song albums, and, side 2 was, half of it was a drum solo. We have to write 20 songs. It's harder. Well, I don't know. I think that you have to look at the history of recorded music and popular music as history at this point. I think the future of it, which seems pretty clear, is streaming. And streaming, somewhere in there lies the conflict, which is the source of streaming needs to pay the artist or the publisher, whoever wrote it, whoever owns it, because without that, they can't afford to buy equipment. They can't afford to create the music. It limits what they do. Now, something is happening at the same time, which is that you can afford to buy equipment, and you can actually record in your bedroom now. But that's not, you can't record the same thing. It's different. It sounds different. You're using digital technology, which then kind of becomes the instrument as opposed to your guitar and amp. And that is going to change the songs that are written, the sound of those songs, what people can afford to record, what it sounds like. And it's going to change the direction of music. And really amazingly creative things will come out of that, but it will never be the same. And so I suppose it scares me because it's different and it's new. But if we look at the kernel of creativity, that's the important thing. People are going to be challenged to be creative in new ways, and they will be. And music fans will benefit from it. I think it's easier to have that. I think it's easier to gauge that when you've had actual time away that's defined as broken up. It sort of creates this long-standing kind of attitude or notion of that was it, we'll never get that again. And then when it's back, I mean, even before we announced it, I got this feeling that there was going to be an audience for it. And I guess for me, there's always a little bit of doubt about everything, but I felt confident that we had a place in the world as a band, and it's turned out to be true. And maybe even more so than I did imagine, because the one thing that I notice now, more than ever when we play a show, is a lot of young fans, and there seems to be more and more every time we go out. And I think that to me is an indication that there's this new generation of rock fans that want to find. They want to find out about who's out there and where did it come from and what happened. And I see their faces, and it reminds me of being a kid discovering older bands and figuring out who came from where. I remember having everything that Cream ever made, by the time I was probably 12, and sitting and listening to the records and hearing the stories about where the musicians came from and what it meant. And this is all post-Cream. It doesn't matter to anyone anymore, but I'm a kid in a garage with no windows listening to these records and figuring out the history of rock. And I think Soundgarden is one of those bands that fits perfectly in that category because of the fact that we have a huge history. We have a huge discography. There's a lot of music to hear, and it's all pretty varied. If you go back to the earliest releases, take it all the way through King Animal, there's a lot of territory musically to cover in there, and it's something that a young rock fan can kind of pull away the layers of for a long time. And I'm really happy about that. Thinking of us as that band is, to me, like the bigger part of success, bigger than anything else. Well, we're definitely going to start writing new songs, and I think we've all agreed on several occasions that we want to keep doing it. And I think it will be very similar to King Animal in that there's no clock on it, and that means to me usually that in the back of my mind I'm always thinking sooner than later. I always sort of see something coming together really easily, and then it never does. It takes a long period of time, but that always seems to work for us. And I think with King Animal, for example, the fact that we put no time limit on when it would be done didn't change it at all. I think, if anything, it came together faster than some of the other records we've made did. And that's what I see happening. And I also see us doing sort of what I just described, which is just kind of going out into some new Soundgarden frontier musically and see what it is. And hopefully we'll be here in a year or two talking about what that is. I'm not sure. One of the highlights really was Brendan O'Brien coming in. I think when he came in, we had a record that was so layered and so epic, with such bad rough mixes that we didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was. And, up to that moment, I probably would have sat here and told you I had all these regrets and that all of these different things should happen. Once he started mixing, he brought it all out, and it was what we wanted, and it was who we were, and it was what I thought that they should have sounded like. And the only criticism I would have really toward any of it would be the performances pretty much on all sides could have been a little looser in the way that I think of Soundgarden as being. And yet, I'm not sure it would be a smart thing to wish that into the album, because that's an album that like engineers and producers have on the console that they reference when they're mixing or recording their album. So it's one of those things like it's considered our master work. So I probably should just look at it and examine it as it all seemed to work out perfectly.